Brock Lesnar revealed as new Vision leader after Seth Rollins betrayed on Raw. You think you know what happened on Monday Night Raw? You think Seth Rollins turning his back on his brothers was just another storyline? Wrong. What we witnessed wasn't just a betrayal, it was the beginning of something far more sinister, something WWE has been hiding from us for months. And the mastermind behind it all? The one person nobody saw coming. Brock Lesnar. Yes, the Brock Lesnar is now leading the Vision, and everything you thought you knew about this faction just got turned completely upside down. Let me tell you something that's going to make your blood boil. While we were all focused on Gable Steveson, while we were watching Otis and Max and Dupree play their roles, while Chad Gable was out there acting like the leader of this faction, Brock Lesnar was pulling the strings from the shadows. And Seth Rollins? He didn't just betray his friends, he betrayed us. Every single person who believed in the architect, who thought he stood for something, who trusted that he would never go back to being the manipulative snake we saw in the Shield's darkest days. But here's where it gets absolutely infuriating. WWE has been lying to our faces. They've been planting breadcrumbs for 6 months, and we were too blind to see it. Remember when Brock randomly appeared backstage at that house show in December? Remember when Paul Heyman made that cryptic comment about new business ventures during his podcast? Remember when Seth started acting strangely during his matches, losing focus, making uncharacteristic mistakes? It was all connected. Every single piece. And you want to know the worst part? The absolute worst part that should have every WWE fan ready to riot? This wasn't a sudden decision. This wasn't Brock seeing an opportunity and taking it. No, no, no. According to multiple sources close to the situation, sources I've personally verified, Brock Lesnar has been orchestrating this takeover since SummerSlam. SummerSlam, people. That's 8 months of planning, 8 months of manipulation, 8 months of WWE creative working with Brock to execute the most elaborate long-term storyline in modern wrestling history, and they kept it hidden from every single dirt sheet, every insider, every so-called journalist in this business. Let's break down exactly what happened on Raw, because the full story is even more twisted than what you saw on television. The show opened with what seemed like a normal segment: Seth Rollins in the ring, cutting a promo about his upcoming match at WrestleMania. Standard stuff, right? Wrong. If you go back and watch, and I mean really watch, you'll notice Seth's body language was completely off. He was fidgeting with his wrist tape, something he only does when he's nervous or planning something. He kept glancing at the entrance ramp, not with anticipation, but with knowledge. He knew what was coming. Then Chad Gable's music hits. The American Maid comes out: Gable, Otis, Maxon, and surprisingly, Gable Steveson, who we haven't seen in weeks. They surround the ring, and for a moment, it looks like we're about to get a typical beatdown scenario. Seth's outnumbered, he's going to fight valiantly, maybe some babyfaces come out to make the save. We've seen this 1,000 times. But then, and this is where my sources tell me even the live crowd didn't fully understand what they were witnessing, Seth Rollins smiled. Not a defiant smile. Not a bring it on smile. A knowing smile. A smile that said, it's finally time. And before Chad Gable could even get a word out, before American Maid could make their move, the lights went out. Now, here's what WWE didn't show you, what they deliberately edited out of the Hulu version and the YouTube clips. During those 15 seconds of darkness, there was audio. Faint, but unmistakable if you were there live or if you watched certain international feeds that didn't get the audio scrubbed. It was Paul Heyman's voice, whispering, "The prophecy is complete." Then Brock Lesnar's music hit, but it wasn't his usual theme. It was a remixed, darker version, almost industrial, with this haunting choir element that made the entire arena feel like something apocalyptic was about to happen. Brock walked out, and immediately something was different. He wasn't wearing his usual UFC-inspired gear. He was in a full black suit, tailored, expensive, looking like a legitimate corporate executioner. Paul Heyman was beside him, but even Heyman looked different. More serious. Less flamboyant. This wasn't the Paul Heyman who jokes and smirks and plays to the crowd. This was the Paul Heyman who destroyed ECW from the inside. This was the Paul Heyman who orchestrated the streak ending. This was the Paul Heyman who always has a plan that's 3 moves ahead of everyone else. They walked to the ring in complete silence. No pyro. No fanfare. Just the ominous new music and the entire American Maid faction parting like the Red Sea to let them through. And when Brock stepped through those ropes, when he stood face to face with Seth Rollins, the entire wrestling world should have realized something historic was about to happen. Seth extended his hand. And Brock, this is the part that should tell you everything about how calculated this whole thing is. Brock didn't just shake it. He pulled Seth in, whispered something in his ear that made Seth's eyes go wide, and then, they embraced. Like brothers. Like co-conspirators. Like 2 men who had been planning this moment for months and were finally seeing their vision come to fruition. The crowd was confused. The commentary team was confused. Michael Cole was stammering through his lines, clearly getting instructions in his headset that contradicted everything he thought was happening. Corey Graves went completely silent for almost 30 seconds, which, if you know Corey, never happens. Even the production crew seemed caught off guard. The cameras were in the wrong positions, missing key moments, scrambling to adjust to something that was clearly bigger than they had prepared for. Then Paul Heyman took the microphone, and what he said next rewrote everything we thought we knew about the Vision. He started by thanking Chad Gable, thanking him for being the perfect placeholder, the ideal decoy, the necessary distraction while the true Vision took shape. Can you imagine? Chad Gable, a former Olympian, a legitimate athlete, one of the best technical wrestlers in WWE, being told to his face that he was just a pawn? The disrespect. The absolute disrespect. But Gable didn't react with anger. He didn't look shocked or betrayed. He smiled. He smiled and stepped aside, taking his place with American Made, who all suddenly looked less like a faction and more like soldiers. That's when I realized they weren't upset because they already knew. American Made wasn't being taken over. They were revealing who they had been working for all along. Heyman continued, "Ladies and gentlemen, 4 months you have been watching what you thought was a faction built on amateur wrestling excellence, on American-made values, on the legacy of Olympic champions. But what you were actually witnessing was the greatest deception in WWE history. The Vision was never about amateur wrestling. It was never about Chad Gable's leadership. It was never about nostalgia for Kurt Angle's legacy. The Vision was always about one thing: domination." And that's when Brock spoke. Brock Lesnar, the man who famously hates talking, who lets Paul Heyman do all his speaking, who once went an entire year without cutting a promo. He grabbed the microphone and spoke directly to the camera. "I don't need to be WWE champion anymore. I don't need to chase titles. I don't need to prove I'm the baddest man on the planet. Everyone already knows. What I need, what this business needs, is someone to burn it all down and rebuild it in my image." And that's exactly what the Vision is going to do. The implications of this are massive. We're not talking about a faction that wants championships. We're not talking about a group that wants to dominate one brand. Brock Lesnar is talking about fundamentally changing WWE itself. And he has the perfect weapon to do it: Seth Rollins, the man who knows every single locker room secret, who has the trust of management, who has main event WrestleManias, who knows exactly how to manipulate both the roster and the audience. But let's talk about Seth's betrayal specifically, because this is what's really going to make your blood boil. Seth Rollins spent the last 2 years positioning himself as the locker room leader, the veteran who helps young talent, the guy who supposedly learned from his past mistakes. He talked endlessly about loyalty, about being there for the next generation, about making sure WWE's future was secure. And it was all a lie. Every bit of it was manipulation to get people to trust him, to lower their guard, to never suspect that he was working with Brock Lesnar to tear down everything they had built. Think about who Seth has been associated with recently. Cody Rhodes, the man challenging for the World Championship at WrestleMania. Kevin Owens, one of Seth's oldest friends, someone who trusted him implicitly. Sami Zayn, the ultimate underdog story, someone Seth publicly supported. Every single one of these men just got stabbed in the back. Not by a rival, not by a heel turn we could see coming, but by someone they considered family. And here's what really makes this sinister: my sources tell me that Seth has been feeding information to Brock for months. Match strategies, injury reports, personal issues, contract negotiations. Everything that happens in that locker room, Brock knew about it. That's why American Made always seemed to be one step ahead. That's why their attacks were always perfectly timed. That's why they knew exactly when and where to strike for maximum impact. Seth Rollins was their inside man, and nobody suspected a thing. Now let's talk about what this means for the rest of the roster, because the fallout from this is going to be nuclear. Cody Rhodes is scheduled to face Roman Reigns at WrestleMania in what's supposed to be the culmination of his redemption story. But now he has to worry about the Vision interfering, about Seth Rollins' supposed friend sabotaging his moment. And you know Brock Lesnar isn't going to let WrestleMania happen without making his presence felt. Drew McIntyre, who has been feuding with American Made for weeks, just found out the faction he's been fighting isn't even the real threat. He's been wasting his time with Chad Gable while Brock Lesnar was orchestrating a hostile takeover of the entire company. LA Knight, who has been building momentum as the next big babyface, is now on the Vision's radar, and if there's one thing we know about Brock Lesnar, it's that he loves destroying rising stars. Just ask Ricochet. Ask Keith Lee. Ask everyone who came up against the Beast and got absolutely annihilated. But the person who should be most terrified right now? Roman Reigns. Think about it: Brock Lesnar has been Roman's greatest rival for almost a decade. They've main event multiple WrestleManias. They've been positioned as the two most dominant forces in WWE. And now, just as Roman is potentially losing his championship, just as his bloodline is falling apart, Brock resurfaces not to challenge him one-on-one, but to lead a faction designed to destroy everything Roman built. The psychological warfare alone is going to be devastating. And can we talk about Paul Heyman's role in this? Because this is vintage Heyman manipulation. He's been Roman's special counsel for years, supposedly dedicated to the tribal chief's success. But we all know Paul Heyman's first loyalty has always been to Brock Lesnar. Always. So the question everyone should be asking is, how long has Heyman been playing both sides? How much information did he feed to Brock while pretending to serve Roman? Did he deliberately help engineer the bloodline's downfall so that Brock's vision could rise from the ashes? My sources, and these are people who have been right about everything regarding this storyline, tell me that there's a reason WWE kept this so secret. They knew if word got out that Brock was coming back, let alone leading a faction, it would dominate all the wrestling news cycles and potentially spoil the shock value. So they fed false information to dirt sheets. They had Brock work out at private gyms instead of the WWE Performance Center. They had him film his segments on days when most of the roster wasn't at the arena. They even created fake travel itineraries to make it seem like he was out of the country. The level of operational security was unprecedented. And you know what that tells me? It tells me WWE knows they have something huge here. They're not messing around. They're not doing this as a short-term ratings pop. This is a long-term storyline that's going to define the next era of WWE programming. Brock Lesnar is a faction leader, with Seth Rollins as his lieutenant, with American-made as their soldiers, with Paul Heyman as the mastermind. This is the most dangerous combination WWE has assembled since the Authority, and it has the potential to be even bigger because Brock brings something Triple H never could: complete unpredictability. Let's also address the elephant in the room, Gable Stevenson's role in all this. The Olympic gold medalist who WWE signed a huge fanfare, who has been positioned as the future of the company, is now aligned with the vision. And based on how Brock looked at him during that segment with pride, with approval, it's clear that Stevenson isn't just another member. He's being groomed. Brock is doing with Gable Steveson what Paul Heyman did with Brock 20 years ago, creating the next unstoppable monster. And with Brock's credentials, with his UFC background, with his understanding of what it takes to be a legitimate combat athlete, Stevenson is going to be dangerous under his mentorship. Otis and Maxon Dupree's involvement is interesting too, because they represent something different. They're not Olympic athletes. They're not former UFC champions. They're characters who have been treated as comedy acts for most of their WWE careers. But put them in this context, with this leadership, and suddenly they become something else: loyal enforcers who have been underestimated and overlooked for too long. And that makes them dangerous in a different way. They have something to prove, and they'll do anything to prove Brock made the right choice in keeping them around. Now here's where things get really interesting from a backstage politics perspective. There have been rumors, unconfirmed but persistent rumors, that Brock Lesnar has been unhappy with his booking for the past couple of years. He's been in part-time roles, special attraction matches, always positioned as the final boss but never as someone driving storylines forward. This vision leadership role? This changes everything. This puts Brock in a position where he's on television regularly, where he's integral to multiple storylines, where he's not just showing up for a payday but actually investing in the product. And if you think WWE is paying Brock his usual per-appearance rate for this, you're crazy. My sources tell me Brock negotiated a completely new contract structure for this role, still incredibly lucrative, but tied to creative input and long-term booking plans. He's not just performing, he's shaping the product. He's in creative meetings. He's working with writers. He's essentially functioning as both talent and consultant, which, given his track record of knowing what works for his character, could revolutionize how top stars are utilized. But let's get back to Seth, because his betrayal deserves its own deep dive. Seth Rollins is one of the most decorated superstars of the past decade. Grand Slam champion, WrestleMania main eventer, the man who slayed the Beast at WrestleMania 35, the man who ended Brock's Universal Championship reign, and now he's working for him? The psychological complexity of that relationship is fascinating. Is Seth doing this because he realizes he can't beat Brock, so he might as well join him? Is there some deeper motivation we haven't seen yet? Or, and this is what I suspect, did Brock offer Seth something he couldn't refuse? Think about Seth's character evolution. He was the trailblazer who rebuilt Raw. He was the Monday Night Messiah who led his own faction. He's always been at his best when he's manipulating people, when he's the architect of chaos. Maybe Brock didn't recruit Seth. Maybe Seth approached Brock. Maybe the visionary saw an opportunity to align with the Beast and create something unprecedented. Maybe this whole thing was Seth's idea from the beginning, and Brock just provided the muscle and legitimacy to make it happen. That possibility makes this even more infuriating. Because if Seth Rollins orchestrated his own heel turn, if he manipulated not just the locker room but the audience into trusting him again just so he could have a bigger betrayal moment, that's nuclear-level heel work. That's the kind of character work that people talk about for decades. And it makes every inspirational promo he cut, every time he talked about fighting for WWE's future, every moment he positioned himself as a locker room leader, it makes all of it retroactively devastating. Let me throw out another theory that's going to make you even angrier. What if Triple H knew? What if this entire angle was approved, maybe even suggested by WWE's chief content officer? Triple H has always been a student of the game, always thinking long-term, always willing to do controversial things if they serve the story. Having Brock Lesnar lead a faction that's going to war with the entire roster? That's compelling television. That's must-see programming. That's the kind of storyline that brings lapsed fans back and keeps current fans engaged. But if Triple H approved this, if he knew Seth was going to betray everyone, if he's been in on this plan from the beginning, the trust issues that's going to create backstage are going to be massive. Wrestlers trust that management has their back, that storylines will be communicated, that they won't be blindsided by major plot developments. If this was kept secret from most of the roster just for the shock value, that's going to create resentment, paranoia, and a toxic atmosphere where nobody knows who to trust. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the vision isn't just a storyline. Maybe it's a meta-commentary on WWE itself, on how management manipulates talent, on how trust is weaponized, on how the business works behind the curtain. Brock Lesnar, the ultimate mercenary who has always done what's best for Brock Lesnar, leading a faction built on betrayal and domination? That's art imitating life. Here's what we know is coming next based on backstage reports. The vision is going to systematically target every top babyface on the roster. They're going to disrupt WrestleMania plans. They're going to force WWE to pivot storylines that have been building for months. And they're going to do it with Brock Lesnar's blessing, which means they have carte blanche to be as destructive as they want, because nobody is going to tell Brock no. Cody Rhodes is going to have to watch his back every single moment leading to WrestleMania. Drew McIntyre's ascension is going to be derailed. LA Knight's momentum is going to be tested. And anyone else who stands in the vision's way? They're going to get destroyed. Because that's what Brock does. That's what he's always done. And now he has an entire faction to do his bidding. The most frustrating part of all this? We should have seen it coming. Looking back at the past few months, the signs were everywhere. Seth's increasingly erratic behavior. Brock's extended absence from television. American-made surprising effectiveness despite being built around amateur wrestling. Paul Heyman's crypt.